Well, morning everybody. Welcome to the Southwest CRC's webinar into cybersecurity and cyber resilience within the agriculture sector. I'm really delighted to have some very knowledgeable guests with us this morning, all of whom we're immensely grateful to for joining us. So let's just kick things off in the traditional fashion with some quick introductions. So Mark Moore, I'm director of the Southwest Cyber Resilience Centre, which is a police-led, not-for-profit initiative that's here essentially to help businesses, charities and parts of the public sector through the southwest region of the UK. Joining us on the call are a couple of cyber experts from company Cyciam, which is local to us and has done a huge amount, I know, in this sector, has a great degree of expertise. So David, can I ask you first of all, just do a quick intro. So who you are and also why you're interested in cybersecurity and farming.
Yeah, no worries, thank you. So my name is Dave Allen. I'm Managing Director and Chief Technology Officer at Cyciam. And my background is 10 years in the British Army and then 10 years in the Foreign Office. So I've got a very strong public sector, public service background, really interested in making the UK safe, strong and as prosperous as it can be. And the reason why I'm interested in this sector in particular is I bought my dog last year, a lockdown puppy, from a chicken farmer in the Northwest. And we got talking about cybersecurity on the farm. Because that's the only small talk I know how to make. And what became apparent was if we were able to break into the CCTV system, which was quite easy when we looked at it properly, we could then pivot onto the environmental controls for all of his chickens and turn them up or down and essentially kill all of his chickens just by breaking into the CCTV system. And that to me was a big red flag for, I don't know whether it's rights activists or whoever else. If somebody knew about that vulnerability and someone knew how to exploit it, somebody probably would because they could. And I also felt that the mitigation to that threat was relatively straightforward. Just separating the systems or putting some other controls in or doing some work with the password. So it made me think, well, actually, how many of the farmers, the backbone of Britain, how many of these organisations are as vulnerable to these sorts of low-level attacks and low-level threats as possible? And then when I started thinking with my old government and military hat on, I thought, well, actually, the aggregated risk of all of these farmers being interconnected means that in a time of war or times of heightened tension, that the whole UK farming sector becomes a very attractive target. And then in the middle, with the rise of ransomware, there's also a very valuable target on some of the big farms for criminal gangs to be able to extort money out of them. So for me, it's about actually, it feels like farming's been left behind for cybersecurity, but the technology hasn't, and the technology is racing forward at a pace, but security hasn't been thought of at the start. So really, I want to get my teeth stuck into the sector and understand how we can help them to be more resilient and safer in a digital age.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's a really good scene setter, actually. It's the kind of things that people don't consider very often, I think, and we'll drill into some of those a bit later on in the call. Stacey, can I turn to you for a quick intro and tell us why you're interested in this topic too?
Yeah, of course. Morning, Mark. Morning, everybody else on the call. My name's Stacey Lydgate. I'm one of the principal consultants over at Cyciam alongside Dave. And I suppose mine is a very personal story. My family have quite a large dairy farm up north in Cumbria. And February 2020, they installed the first kind of automated milking machines. So having been kind of very hand-driven, very herringbone kind of milk farm for many years, they've gone very, very automated, very digital. And I've managed to get up to see all of this. And in the background, was also thinking about starting a master's degree in cybersecurity. Like Dave, a very strong public sector background, a lot of technical consulting, a lot of digital transformation. And suddenly the two things collided. Here was my family putting their faith and their well-being in all of these machines, putting the well-being of the herd in all of this new technology. And I could see the holes in a lot of the way that it had been installed. So how secure was the home network? How secure was everything that surrounded all of these machines, and how protected were they going to be? So I remember getting on the phone to Dave and saying, I think I found the dissertation that I want to write for the master's degree that I've just started. And it's gone from there, strength to strength. So we've started quite a few research projects within the company off the back of that one weekend visit, and off the back of that change that's happened up in the Lake District. So for me, it's not just about the whole of the UK farming industry. It's also about something a lot closer to home as well. So anything that we can do to kind of make the awareness better and make sure that people are really informed around little changes that they can make that will hopefully protect them going forward is really important to me, and it's important to us as a company too.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thanks.
Ed, can I turn to you then for a quick intro and perhaps tell us why you're interested in cybersecurity too?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Ed Humber. I'm one of the Devon NFU County Advisors. So I'm here on behalf of our 3,000 farming members across the county, and really, realistically, if we look wider, farmers across the region, Southwest, national, however it be, just to represent their view. We're finding that technology is flooding into agriculture, and it is in every part of our existence, and it's going to continue to go forward. As a result, we therefore need to make sure that our farming members are as aware as can be. It's not just about the inconvenience, it is about a business risk. And if we can help support them, and through this conversation today, raise some awareness and get them to think about it, then potentially we can stop a fire before it happens. We're in a period of change now. Everything's being expected to go digital, whether it be reporting about your countryside stewardship schemes back to DEFRA when they ask for evidence, whether it's collecting data around electronic identification, because that will be moving into bovines in a very short period, and the livestock information programme, and the fact that we're going to be doing more of our data records and movements online alongside just standard technology. The computer that sits in your dairy that records all your information for your cows, if that's hacked and you can't get to it, what is the impact on yourself? Have you got a backup? Is it all being utilised correctly? And then equally, diversification. If farmers have diversified their businesses, loads of people have got a farm shop or some item of selling direct to customers where they're storing data, and they've got holiday complexes and they're storing data, and then they're potentially GDPR issues if you're hacked and you lose it all. So how do you protect yourself? How are you protecting the data you hold of others? I think it's very important that we've got a great opportunity here today as a bit of a forum to discuss it, see what we can do to help everyone.
Thanks, Ed. So let's open up. We've sort of touched on some of the issues about the potential threat towards agriculture. I suppose my first question, maybe to you, Dave, is well, that's a threat, but why would it be likely to occur? What's the interest in somebody trying to break open a small farm on the fringes of Exmoor, the Quantock Hills? Why are these people likely to be targeted?
I think it's changing the lens through which you look at the threat. So if you think about traditional sort of breaking and entry or burglary or that sort of thing, somebody has to target your house, your farm, your premises. They've got to physically be there. And so there's a whole range of motivations why an individual or group of individuals would be at that location attacking that physical premises. With everything being connected on the internet, the same motivation isn't there. It's not necessarily about that particular farm being of particular interest to a particular person. It's about criminals run and people in just general kids would run automated tools that are constantly scanning the internet for things that are exposed to the internet and are vulnerable. And when they found them, they'll have a go because they can. So it's not necessarily about you having something in particular of interest. It's about you getting caught up in the collateral of people running automated tools across the internet. We ran an experiment a few months ago where we put a vulnerable machine on the internet and left it there for 12 hours with everything open. So within the first 20 minutes, we'd had, I think, 40 attacks, 40 password brute force, that sort of thing. Within 2 hours, it had gone up to the low thousands, and then 12 hours, left it overnight, it was 130,000 attacks the next day. So, and none of that was a person behind the keyboard. That's all automated tools scanning and looking for vulnerabilities. And what you have is you have people that will automatically look for vulnerabilities, automatically be scanning. When they find one, they'll try and exploit it. And when they've exploited it, they will then sell that access to a ransomware gang. And then that ransomware gang will pay them 50p or something ridiculous. but then they will use that access to deploy ransomware on that system and then try and extort the owner of that system. So the fact that you've got a business that's using the internet to communicate with other parts of your business means that your business has a propensity to be vulnerable to cyber attacks. And because you are a business, you've got something value in the fact that you've got an operation that you need to maintain, and criminal gangs know this. So that's just the criminal threat. There's also just the activist threat. You know, people may not like what you're doing. We've seen lots of different extremists in the UK. This could be an emerging tool of those groups. You know, if they got themselves organised and realised that actually the barriers to entry are really low, well, the impact is massive. Using my chicken farms example before, then you could see an increased threat from people who don't need to be wearing balaclavas breaking into barns to have an effect. They can be sat in a different country if they wanted to, far out of reach of the arm of the law, carrying out these sort of attacks. And then I mentioned before the state aggregator threat. That's probably more one for DEFRA and the government than your average farmer. But I think that the core of the point is it's not about you. It's about the opportunity that an attacker, criminal, activist has to exploit your business for their own personal gain.
It's a really interesting, so talking about that sort of state thing, isn't it? I think a lot of the headlines that we all see are about China, Putin, huge state things, and it feels really difficult to equate that with running a small business, doesn't it? Which effectively that's how a farming operation may be set up. Yeah. Stacey, what's your view on that kind of angle? So is the stuff that we see in the news of relevance to us when we're trying to run a farm?
Absolutely. I think there's more and more instances of where and let's call it agricultural technology rather than just farms. So where we look at those robots, where we look at automated technology that are taking over from the workforce of kind of yesteryear, where they're being attacked to incapacitate. I think you've got case studies from the States, especially where ransomware has been put onto farms. There's a couple of big cases out in New Zealand where sheep farms have been completely, held up and operations stopped for weeks. And not just farms. I think when we look at the supply chain as a whole, that's the other angle as well. So, how do you really stop something if you don't like it? Well, the supply chain, it starts with farmers and farms, whether that's milk collection, whether that's animal transportation, whether that's crops being moved from place to place, actually supplying big supermarkets, supplying the big producers. That's another angle too. So anything that knocks out those operations, we're starting to see more and more reports of that happening. I think this recently, like I said, I think an FBI case study that's been published and warnings that have happened, but it's becoming more prevalent, definitely.
And but it is something I know that we've seen, particularly on the other side of the pond in Australia. There's a far more lively debate, I think, around some of the agri-food cyber security convergence than perhaps we're currently seeing public debate here. Ed, what's this kind of NFCU's thinking around cyber security? We're grateful to you for being on the call today, but why are you concerned, and how do you assess the kind of threat level?
It's difficult, I suppose, to assign a level across the whole of the sector. I suppose if you break it down into, I suppose, the importance to each part of the business. So if it's a procurement side of your business, so you're buying in animal feed and the animal feed mill that you buy from has had a hack and therefore they can't service their orders, and you're on a 3-day expectance of your next feed delivery and it doesn't turn up, and you're a poultry or a pig farm or whatever farm, but you're reliant on that food, that causes a massive issue, because then at that point they're reverting systems back to a person sat in an office trying to organize rounds, deliveries, dispatch, conformities, make sure that the mixes are right, and that does happen. That has happened, and that's on the simplistic side of procurement into your business. And then equally so, it's distribution from the product from the opposite end, whether that is animals going to an abattoir, whether it's selling your wheat, whether it's selling your straw, whatever it be. If for some reason your business is locked down and you're unable to make those transactions, or especially get animals or anything out of the door at the right time, then that has a massive knock-on impact. From a technology basis around equipment, even some of the more simpler systems now have got an ability to be controlled from afar, whether that's you pay a monitoring system, whether it's a independent service offered by the manufacturer that are looking at how the engine's running, whether or not the bearings are keeping up, and anything that even provides a parts list to say, it's going to need this part in 6 months' time, does potentially also have the opportunity that it can be shut down. And that's where you got to look at from a ransomware. If your nice expensive piece of kit in the yard is sat there for a period of time that can't be used, what's the impact on you? And I'm not suggesting that the companies that provide it aren't covering all the bases. They are, but people also get smarter, and it only takes a small point in which time perhaps delays and something happens. So that's our concern. But also equally, as I sort of said earlier, it's businesses. It's not just a farm. Businesses are so much wider than that. And people, you give yourself true credit and sit down and make a risk register and look at what technology or what data you have stored that is important to your business. I think it'd be quite alarming how much people do utilize, even if they say it's simple and they're just a standard livestock farm that perhaps doesn't utilize much robotics or automation. Be amazing how much data you would have captured somewhere that you need to get to and you want to be protected from.
Yeah, we find that very often, that people don't seem to appreciate how reliant they are until suddenly the screens go blank, and then they realise, and it's just that little bit too late. So if we sort of started out by setting out some of the extent of the threat, which is probably quite interesting, some areas that people might not have thought of before. I suppose the next natural question is, well, what can I do about that? Is it about hoping that one of the big manufacturers sorts things out? Am I waiting for the government, or are there actually simple things that I can do today? Stacey, I can see you smiling, Riley. I'll let you jump in first on that. Well, what can I do now to make things better within my own business?
So I'm laughing because I think I wrote in something recently. You don't have to be Mr. Robot or be an absolute hacker to have an effect on how secure you are. I think recently there's been some really good guidance published by the NCSC, the Cyber Centre, specifically aimed at the agricultural sector. So that was, I think, the first time that they've published that, beginning of this year. It's implementing the basics well. And I remember having a conversation with Dave many years ago where he calls it, don't be the slowest buffalo in the herd. Just make sure that you're ahead of that lowest common denominator. So keeping your personal devices up to date, making sure that you're applying different or the most up-to-date software patches and things like that, making sure that you're using really strong passwords on things, and making sure that if you've got employees that they understand the importance of data, they understand the importance of good cyber security, keeping backups, really being able to spot those dodgy phishing emails. Was it really that person that sent it to you? Checking the email address that it comes from. There's some really good things that you can do. And I think just being aware that there's lots of different ways that technology can be manipulated, and criminals criminals and other threat actors can get the better of you. It's not just about computers. Phones are vulnerable as well. Text messages can be vulnerable. So there's a lot of guidance out there. So make sure that you're having a look. And I know the Cyber Resilience Centre have done quite a good overview of what you can do. So make sure you're checking Cyber Resilience Centre. And I think you've got some really good links as well. But there's lots of stuff on the internet out there that can help you.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. And that's a really good chat, actually, in terms of the National Cyber Security Centre, because there's a whole bunch of really good stuff on their website, isn't there, including that kind of core offering of where to start, and we'll happily signpost people towards that. David, let me come to you with a different angle around what we can do then. So here I am running a business in the sector. So what about my supply chain? What about the people who perhaps my managed service provider, the people that provide my computing stuff for me? What sort of questions should I be making of those individuals that aren't internal, but that are really closely linked with me?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a good one from Ed as well around supply chain, because I think we often see people trying to outsource the risk to their suppliers, and they are part of the risk if they're not exacerbating the risk, because you think it's done, you don't have to worry about it. It's just worth mentioning this point that all the incidents that we've been called to, all the emergency response sort of tasks we've been called to over the last 12 months have all been a supply chain enabled attack. So whether it be, we went to one, it was heating and ventilation, control server that the supplier had access to be able to access the building. Well, that was connected to everything else in the building. So when they go through that server, which the client didn't own, it was a by the supplier, they could then pivot from that server and ransomware the whole estate. We had one where they'd outsourced a firewall, so the bit of equipment that protects the organization from the internet. They outsourced that to a provider. The provider hadn't updated it in 6 months. And so that by outsourcing the risk, they'd taken their eye off the ball in terms of accountability for their own security, and completely trusted the supplier to do it. So I think there are some basic things that you can do around supplier due diligence. One is around looking for accreditations. So you mentioned the NCSC. So we're an accredited Cyber Essentials provider. And we think it's a really good baseline level of security for most organizations. We use it ourselves internally. It doesn't get you to sort of Barclays Bank level of international sort of security, but it's a good framework that anyone can follow. It's a good way to ask a cyber security provider or IT provider if you've got the things on that list. And then it gives you a badge that you can show and display that shows that you've got a level of competence in cybersecurity. And in government contracts now, if you want to apply to any government framework, you've got to have Cyber Essentials to be able to apply for that framework. So I don't think we can do it immediately, but it might be something the NFU want to start to think about in terms of coordinating what is that standard that farming needs to be able to assure the supply chain. And that might be Cyber Essentials, it might be something else. The other thing as well is around just basic questionnaires. So if you're entering into a contract with a supplier, you're absolutely entitled to give them a questionnaire around their security. And if you can't scrutinize it, get professional help to help interrogate the answers from that supplier and be able to find a way to establish their level of credibility in terms of providing you with a secure service. And also you can ask things like the recent penetration test report. So a penetration test is where a company like ours will try and break into an organization. And we'll normally issue quite a comprehensive report that shows all the vulnerabilities we found, how we exploited them, and what they can do to fix them. So asking for that sort of information from a supplier before you sign on a dotted line for a 12-month contract to supply security or to supply technology services are all within your gift as the consumer of those services.
Thanks, David. Ed, let me turn to you. Is there anything that's happening at the moment to try and help people at a more strategic level? So some of those simple things that they can do in terms of their own protection and checking out the people they work with. But what about the influence on the wider industry? So if I'm providing that piece of plant that's being sold to 1,000 farmers across the region over the next year, is there work that's being done with those suppliers at government level or through groups like your own, or is that still a bit of a gap for us all?
I'll be totally honest, a gap for me to know exactly what's going on there. I know from a national perspective, so we launched our own cybercrime update for members, and it's a document they can download that gives them tips and hints and points that runs in line with the National Cybersecurity Centre. And that was launched in April because we wanted to raise that concern. This is my view. I'm not suggesting this is a National Farmers Union national view. The providers generally have their backs covered. When I see issues, it generally comes down to how it's actually then put onto that farm. So it goes through someone's private system somewhere, and that generally where we would generally see that we'd hear through the grapevine, the breakdown is there. It's my personal computer that was hacked, or my mobile device, whichever operating system you're running it from, is where we've seen it. There are calls nationally to try and make equipment safer. I mean, we have companies that provide additional security, whether that's on machinery or individual handheld devices or electronic identification devices. But equally, we could have stronger systems potentially from the outset and not rely on an independent to bolster on. So I suppose the level of basic protection provided could be increased from the manufacturer from the outset in some areas. I mean, we still have a situation where some vehicles, yes, they come with a mobilizer and a key, but it's not really the hardest system to get into, and therefore I suppose the threat then is, if you put a new system on it, is it then electronically backed up somewhere through technology to allow it to be remotely activated or deactivated? And then do we find ourselves back in a cyber issue? Nationally, for members, if they go onto NFU online, there is a whole portfolio there. If they search cyber security, it will come up there with the hints and tips guide. I know we've run a lot of press on it, but as everything, that time goes on, and it's not necessarily in people's forefront. So if they need to look for it, that's where I'd suggest they go, or come through us here, Mark, and through yourself at the Cyber Resilience Centre here in the Southwest. Do it, but that's hopefully that's covered what you were asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that cyber just spans a whole range of stuff, and more often than not, the stuff that we see in the news is about the big state things, the huge manufacturers, the enormous attacks. But I think the theme that I'm picking up through all of your answers is that actually the individual can make a real difference, whether Stacey, from you in terms of the basics around the passwords, Dave around asking the right questions at the point of supply, and Ed through accessing some of that advice and guidance out there before they make a purchase. Just doing those real simple bits makes quite a difference. Stacey, I might ask you, if I may, just for a moment, just touch on Cyber Essentials, because Dave lost it, but I'm really interested, and I think that's probably relevant for people on the call. So what is Cyber Essentials, and what does it give them?
So Cyber Essentials is, essentially a standard that's been kind of mandated by the government that brings everybody up to a level of cybersecurity where you as individuals and businesses are protected. And it's a really, really great way of saying across lots of different disciplines in cybersecurity. And I think that's one thing to point out. It's not just about one bit. There's lots of different kind of arms and legs to cybersecurity. Cyber Essentials lays that out in a really easy to understand way. And normally it is about doing a quick audit on the types of things that we would see, the type of kind of areas, looking at what gaps that you've got, and then saying, how can you come up to that standard that's needed to pass Cyber Essentials? So it's about looking at what have you got today, what do you need to change, and then how do we implement, or how do you implement changes that will bring you up to that national standard that's accepted?
Thank you. It's a really helpful overview. So if we've spoken about kind of why farming, we've spoken about some of the simple things that the sector could do to protect itself. I suppose then the interesting next question is, why wouldn't they? Ed, I might turn to you first on this. I think what do you think engagement is like in the farming community? And I suppose, what are the things that scare them off? I mean, cost is forefront in my mind. I'd be worried about the expense of all this. But what in your experience might stop people from engaging with this agenda?
It's hard. I suppose, Mark, it's hard for me to make an assessment of how many have or do, to what degree. I think if I was to cast a net across, it is the relevance of, will it happen to me? I suppose, have you made a risk register? Do you feel that you could potentially be at risk? We are generally, as a sector, very trusting sector. Farming has access and does have a lot of technology in it, but it may not be given the importance or the respect, I suppose, it deserves, because it's one part of your business and it's a very, very busy life. Farming involves a huge amount of things. Technology for some is a frustration that they have to use. It's not necessarily a desire. They don't want it. They just have to utilize it, and therefore it does not fit at the forefront of everything that they choose to do. Whereas I suppose on a different scale in other aspects of life, people would build their business around the technology, and that would be their most important part. Whereas farmers, generally, it's the day-to-day, it's the farming that comes first, and therefore quick access, in and out. And a lot of these guys and girls out there doing it they've inherited this. It's kind of, they've fallen into having to have technology rather than necessarily being trained. I mean, the level of training that you would get 20 years ago at a college would, just as day-to-day living and going through secondary education, etc., and for a degree, etc., would be completely different to what you get now. So the level of understanding changes, and automatically we move in such a fast frame that technology is moving really fast. people get new equipment all the time, new iPads, new computers, new phones, handheld devices. A mobile phone was just simply a mobile phone 15 years ago. And now nearly everyone has a smartphone, and they expect to be able to utilize it, and they rely on the apps, and it connects in through their technology. So life has changed, but you've done it automatically without thinking about it and thinking about the consequences. And I think that's where I said about a risk register, is actually sitting down and writing a list of going, correct, how much do I back it up? Do I have the knowledge to know what to do? Am I currently doing something that is actually secure enough to actually make it worthwhile doing, or have I just been making a hash of trying to protect myself? And therefore, taking advice from appropriate services is key. I mean, it's money spent, admittedly, I get that, but I suppose you need to also make an assessment of what's the cost to your business if you can't utilize it, isn't it? It's where is the impact to you, and that's that part of your risk register.
Yeah, it's a really interesting reflection, actually, the extent to which the business was there and the tech was parachuted on top, and increasingly so over recent years. I think you're right. That's probably a really big reason for the risk, isn't it? Dave, let me sort of play devil's advocate with you then. So it's going to cost me too much, it's going to take too long, and it's probably not going to happen. Convince me.
I think there's ways you can get around a cost issue. And I think, as Ed mentioned, a lot of the problems will be similar across lots of similar sized farms. So if those guys pooled their resource together, found someone to talk to, that they could share the cost across 10 farms, the advice will probably be the same around how you implement strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, like Stacey mentioned before, where you put your backups. If you put them in the cloud and you lose your data, you need to understand how long that's going to take to download that data from those backups within the cloud. If you've got them in a safe, it's much quicker. So understanding some of those little things, go through the Cyber Essentials framework, that can be done to 10 farms as easily as it can be done to one farm. So there's economies of scale, I think, in forming collective groups that have got a similar set of circumstances and they can share the same experience. The complexity is going to be an increasing problem. So we've seen this in manufacturing, we've seen this in oil and gas, we've seen this in all these sort of sectors where they had heavily dependent automated systems that were isolated from everything else. And to get the efficiencies and economies of scale for business owners, they've started to connect that power station over there with that power station over there and that power station over there with a central IT function that manages them all. Well, this becomes the force multiplier for an attacker. In the same way as a managed service provider can be a force multiplier for an attacker to get after their customers. And I think a lot of the farms will probably go the same way. Maybe not the smaller ones, but there's definitely a hierarchy of farms where the mid-tier ones that maybe don't quite have the resources to pay for the things that the big boys do, but are more exposed than maybe some of the smaller farmers. They're trying to get economies of efficiency so they can sort of break into the next level. And I think that's the risk. So it may not be necessarily one they're going to face today or tomorrow, but over the next few years, we're definitely going to see more automation. We're definitely going to see more complexity. We're definitely going to see more outsourcing of those services. And when you outsource something, I think there needs to be a bit of education around where your data now sits. If company X is selling you a service and you're sat on an iPad managing your farm from 10 miles away, but that data probably isn't going from your iPad to that farm. That data is probably going from that iPad to that service provider's data center, which might be in Ukraine, which might be in Romania, which might be in wherever else, then going to your farm back again. So I don't necessarily think people need to worry about that or be too concerned, but people just need to be aware of how that system is set up before they buy products. And again, you can use, if you've got all other farmers of a similar size or similar types of business, you can pull together and use a company like us or go to the Cyber Resilience Centre and ask them the questions, or even go to Cyber Resilience questions and say, so the Cyber Resilience Centre, what questions should I be asking? I think, as Stacey said, there's tons of resources out there. NCSC is fantastic. The Cyber Resilience Centres, the public-private partnership that you guys are enabling between private sector organisations, yourselves, and private sector organisations like ourselves is fantastic. The NCSC are doing a really good job. Loads and loads of literature online, whether it's for farming, supply chain management, the 10 steps, Cyber Essentials, there's loads out there. It's just trying to work with organisations that have got reach into all those farms, like Ed and the NFU, to try and help raise awareness to a level where farmers become much more competent at getting their own access to the right data, to ask the right questions, to get the right answers, to make their farmers safer, stronger and more prosperous.
Yeah, thanks, David. Some really good stuff in there. Stacey, I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment.
Oh, no.
I've got a quarter of an hour and no money. What is there something that I can do just to be a little bit safer at the end of that 15 minutes than I was at the start?
15 minutes. I mean, have you got access to the internet? Are you allowed?
Go on.
Okay. So I would say go to the NCSC pages, check out the advice that they're giving to the agricultural sector, small farms and farmers. Check out the advice that is being given by the NFU and follow the steps. I'm sure we've also put together, I think, a quick couple of pages that we've sent to you. We'll probably get that out of here. It's got some really good links on what you can do. It gives you the details of multi-factor authentication you can download, gives you the steps to change the passwords on your home router to make sure that your home internet is safer, gives you some really top tips around how you can change your passwords to make sure that's okay. And also just think about day to day, what's coming into your email inbox, what's coming into your phone inbox, what can you look for that's a really good sign, really good sign, indicator of crime or some kind of dodgy activity. 15 minutes, top tips that are provided by NCSC, NFU, and the paper that we've written from Cesium to the Cyber Resilience Centre. It may save you thousands of pounds in the future. Definitely 15 minutes well spent.
Awesome. I knew you'd come through. Right, well, that's warmed us up nicely then, because we've got just under 10 minutes left on the call, and I've got a bunch of questions. I'm keeping an eye on the margins too on this call. I've got a bunch of questions that were submitted by some of our community in advance. So if I may, I'm going to run this as a real quick fire round. I don't know whether to award points and a teddy bear prize at the end, but David, can I just sort this stuff out by buying insurance?
To a point. I think if you bought car insurance and left all your car doors open and it got stolen, I think you would be liable, not the insurance company. And the same principles apply to cyber insurance. I think if you try and make a claim against cyber insurance, they will inspect your systems and they will expect to find a level of security. If you don't have that level of security, then I think that gives an insurance provider a good excuse not to pay out. And we see this on the bigger cases, not so much on the smaller cases at the moment. But cyber insurance is still a relatively immature market and doesn't quite provide the same level of resilience or security as good old-fashioned passwords, two-factor authentication, backups, antivirus. We'll keep saying the same things over and over again because most of them are free, most of them are really easy to sort out, and most of them will save you from being that slow as buffalo.
Okay, Stacey, what does a good password look like anyway? We keep mentioning.
So personally, and I'll talk you through what I do, all about having like two parts to your password. Something that is like a unique passphrase to you. So something like Jack and Jill went up the hill, JAJWUTH. And then something at the beginning of it that will be triggered by what you might be going on to. So I don't know, let's say you're going to Amazon, shopping, shopping in brackets, and then a passphrase afterwards. 2 bits that that passphrase that you're using is unique to you, and you're changing some of those things. So good passwords, normally lots of different parts, characters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase. What you're trying to do is stop people from guessing something and making it too easy. So the more that those automated tools look at, shorter passwords are really easy to crack. If you're using, Stacey, really easy to crack. Make it more complicated.
And some great advice on the NCSC site about passwords as well. So that's a really good start.
I just add to that as well. What we want to try and do is take away the human in as much of this as possible. So password managers like LastPass, or even the one that comes with Safari on your Mac or things like that, really good at limiting the amounts of password reuse you get. One of the things that we always look for whenever we try and break into an organization as part of a test is password reuse. So we will look in breach databases, we'll look in other source of data to see whether Ross from the Cyber Resilience Centre has got a password in that breach, and then we'll use that password or a variation of that password against known accounts that belong to Ross. So if you use a password manager, you mitigate that whole risk.
Yeah, great advice. It's certainly how I'm storing mine. because my memory won't retain more than one piece of information at once. I'm not alone with that, I know. So let me ask you the next one then. It might be a simple one, but I think it's worth asking. Stacey, people in cyber tend to mention patches and stuff. What's that all about? And tell us about updates and how often we have to do it, and actually what we do.
Okay, so patches, and I'll talk to this in like quite simple terms because I'm not technical by background. So patches, often if people find vulnerabilities in software or in hardware, so the applications that you use or the actual technology, like computer that you've got, a patch is something that will bring it back up to being secure again. So I think the most common thing that we see, or the most common occurrence of that, is if you've got an iPhone, you often see the iOS update. So that's a patch, making sure that you're bringing yourself up to the most recent version of an operating system, the most recent version of an application. If that means that the people that have invented that software, invented that operating system, have found vulnerabilities, they fix them, and they're releasing something that is going to protect you and the rest of the people that are using them. So that's what we mean by patching, keeping things up to date.
Okay, so do I need to do something, or does that just happen automatically? I mean, here I am sat in front of a Microsoft system. So what, do I need to push a button?
So it depends what you set up. You can actually have automatic updates. I have automatic updates that are running. Also with Apple, like the Application Center, often you'll get a notification. Make sure you're checking in on those regularly. Often I get little notifications that say this will run later tonight. Obviously with work, we're very, very quick at any time something comes out. Set things to automatically update. Normally you might have to keep your device or your phone at a certain battery level to make sure that it happens. So just be aware of that. But automatically setting updates to run is probably the safest thing to do.
Brilliant, thanks. David, I'm going to turn to phishing for a moment. We hear a lot about phishing, don't we? So scam emails, essentially. Is there an easy way to recognise these? What are the kind of warning markers at the moment?
I don't know. They're getting more and more sophisticated. I think it's always a good idea to check the email address. So if the email address comes from, I'm going to pick on Ross Brown's again because I can see his name. If the email comes from Ross Brown and something about it doesn't look right, the language, it's not addressed to you personally, is always a good indication that it's not a legitimate email. The attachment has got a weird file extension that it's not a .PowerPoint, it's a something else. When you try and open it, it asks you to enable macros. That's another good indication. Anyone that's got any email that's got a sense of urgency about it, that's trying to get you to perform an activity or an action or visit somewhere quickly that you weren't expecting, it's probably it's probably a false email. So there was a story about someone who spoke to us about they'd had an email about an invoice they were owed from a tile shop or something like that in Vietnam, and the guy said, I've got this invoice from tiles in Vietnam, what's to do? And we said, well, have you bought tiles from Vietnam? He said no. I said, well, ignore it. I think it's just a level of common sense that you can apply to a lot of this sort of stuff. The old Russian sort of phrase, trust but verify, is also one that I think needs to be applied, especially when it comes to transferring money. So if you've got an invoice to pay to one of your suppliers or one of your customers asking you to change bank details, always make a phone call or some other check and balance on the transaction before you click on that button to change any bank details. But by and large, phishing emails are getting more and more complicated to spot. Things like Mimecast, email filtering systems on Microsoft and things like that are all really straightforward, relatively inexpensive things to install, and will get rid of the majority of stuff you see.
That's brilliant. Here ends the quickfire round and almost the call. I'm grateful to you. I declare it a draw. Let me just kind of end with just going around the table and asking so what we can each do to help people who might be on the call or listening to us as part of the podcast. So Stacey, David, I don't know which one of you wants to jump in first, but talk to us about CySIAM very briefly. So what can you do to help people who might want to take this further?
Very, very quickly, I'll let Stacey add some bits as well. She'll definitely have a different opinion to me, but I think what we can do is just provide that basic advice. Just having a quick phone call and understanding where you are as an organization and what basic things you can put in place that are free, that just require a small amount of configuration, that just raise your awareness levels to a point where you can then create a risk register. You can make risk-based decisions around what it is you're doing as a business. You don't necessarily need to go out there and buy the biggest cyber product that there is, but at the same time, you can't afford to not do anything. So at the very, very basic level, just speak to someone and get some basic advice around what things you can do that are relevant to your business, because there'll be different for each type of business, each size, and go from there. But that is my one bit of advice to anyone listening to this podcast.
Thanks, David. Stacey, go on. He's giving you the mic.
No, I think the other thing that certainly we're doing as Cysium is working with people like yourself and the NFU, also people like DEFRA, to be able to do a lot of the technical research to look at the trends that are coming out and where maybe farmers and farms haven't got that cash flow to be able to look at things. Companies like us, and we're not the only people, and we're certainly not the only people with technical skills to do that. I'm really interested in this from a point of view of how can we keep the UK and the sector safe. So that's the other thing that we can bring to this, is being ahead or a step ahead of the types of attacks, so that we can make sure that people like yourselves and the NFU have got the right types of advice that is really easy to implement. So that's the other thing that we're certainly focused on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stacey.
Guys, add one more thing to that. Thank you, Stacey. You reminded me of something else. None of this is new. So the farmer sector going through this now, going through this big digitization, this big change. The manufacturing are going through it as well. They're still going through it. They've been going through it for the last 10 years. Critical national infrastructure, power stations, nuclear, they've all gone through it. Businesses generally have all gone through this big change. So there's nothing that can't be taken from all those different sectors and applied to agriculture. So there's a lot of stuff already out there. Sorry.
Not at all. It's really useful, David. Ed, can I come to you? So what help can the NFU offer if someone approaches about cyber?
So we have our Call First Centre, which is it's a phone number members can dial in. That will give them access to business guides and various other examples where they can pick up the cyber resilience work that we've done, and that programme of just simple steps and questions to ask yourself locally. If it's not you and it's someone that you're dealing with and there's issues within your supply network, then pick up the phone. See if we can assist with support for trying to unlock areas that are causing you issues. Signposting, inevitably we're signpost people to the Cyber Resilience Centre, and really if not, we can potentially try and put on meetings or events for members if they're looking for training. If they want just basic information, then we can help try and start that and instigate a change. So talk to us, tell us what you want, what you need, and we'll happily do what we can do to try and assist.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. And I'm going to end by interviewing myself for 10 seconds, if you'll indulge me. Might even take a bit more, just about the sort of Cyber Resilience Centre and where we offer, which we've not touched on today. So we are police-led, we're not for profit, and we exist to protect businesses across the southwest region, from Gloucestershire, Wiltshire and Dorset, right the way down to the pointiest end of the pointy end of Cornwall. We will give people a free call membership for our centre, which includes a bunch of common sense advice and signposting towards a lot of the simple stuff that we've spoken about today, simple free bits that you can do for yourself, and we'll contact you and talk you through that so you've got a bit of guidance. If you need a bit more, then we've got webinars like this. We send out a monthly update that lets people know what the latest scams look like, phishing emails, updates required. So hopefully, I always say read that 1 month into, and at least half your life you're safer than you would have been. And beyond that, if you need services, then clearly we've got links in some of the great people that we've got on the call today and beyond who can really help your business. So we can do that, and we can also get local students in to have a look at, whether it's a website for your farm shop or actually some of your internal systems and continuity plans. We can do that in a really affordable way. So there's a big offer here, and it's not a sales pitch. It's a not-for-profit. We want to protect you. And I would say, in kind of concluding and saying how grateful I am to all of you for giving up your time today, that we've really found that within the cyber industry, that since as a CRC and serving officers we've stepped into this space, we've found how altruistic and helpful those in the industry are, very genuine with their motives. So I know there's a lot that can be done. I hope the information that we've all shared today has been useful to a few of those listening to the call. And I'll just conclude by saying a massive thank you. And we'll probably end the recording there, I think. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, thank you.